Okay, well then, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Humanists of Greater Portland Sunday morning meeting. HGP believes strongly in freedom of speech, but the views expressed by myself, our reader, today's speaker, HGP members, and our guests at today's meeting are not the official views of the Humanists of Greater Portland.
Reading today is from P.Z. Myers. I met him when we had a national humanist meeting of some kind in Portland here about 15 years ago or something, and he was there. He was a sharp fellow. He wrote this book, The Happy Atheist, and I opened it to a random spot, and it's great. In 1935, Sinclair Lewis wrote a novel called It Can't Happen Here, about an America taken over by populist dictator. His hero explained how it could happen. Why, there's no country in the world that can get more hysterical, yes, or more obsequious than America. Look how Huey Long became absolute monarch over Louisiana, and how the Right Honorable Mr. Senator Berzelius Windrip owns his state. Listen to Bishop Prang and Father Coughlin on the radio, divine oracles to millions. Remember how casually most Americans have accepted Tammany grafting in Chicago gangs and the crookedness of so many of President Harding's appointees. Could Hitler's bunch or Windrip's be worse? Remember the Ku Klux Klan? Remember our war hysteria when we called sauerkraut Liberty cabbage and somebody actually proposed calling German measles Liberty measles? And wartime censorship of honest papers? Bad as Russia. Remember our kissing the feet of Billy Sunday, the $1 million evangelist, and of Amy McPherson, who swam from the Pacific Ocean clear into the Arizona desert and got away with it? Remember the Kentucky night riders? Remember the trainloads of people have gone to enjoy the lynchings? Not happen here? Shooting down people just because they might be transporting liquor? No, that couldn't happen in America. Why, where in all history has there ever been a people so ripe for a dictatorship as ours? We're ready to start on a children's crusade, only of adults right now. And change a few names, and that could have been written today. The book can be summarized in this misattributed quote. Lewis didn't actually say it, but it is a perfect description of our own situation. When fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross.
Humanism is an approach to life based on reason and our common humanity, recognizing that moral values are properly founded on human nature and experience alone. Humanism affirms the inherent dignity and worth of every human being. Since this is the only life of which we are certain, humanists believe that creative ability and personal responsibility are strongest when the mind is free from supernatural belief and operates in an atmosphere of freedom and democracy. And now, let's introduce our program. Isa Peña is Director of Innovation Law Lab, an organization of lawyers, coders, and advocates fighting for immigrant and refugee justice. He's going to discuss Oregon's current state of immigrant justice, recent attacks on immigrant communities, and Oregon's response. A longtime organizer and leader in the immigrant justice movement here, and formerly the interim executive director of Causa Peña is the daughter of immigrant Oregonians and leverages her strengths and skills in relationship building and policy advocacy to help advance immigrant justice and policy. She's a member of the Oregon Worker Relief Executive Committee and a chair of Oregon for All. Please welcome Isa Peña.
Thank you all so much for having me join you all today. And thank you so much for the wonderful introduction and the invitation to join you all today. As was mentioned, my name is Isa Peña, and I am the Director of Strategy at Innovation Law Lab. And I'm here to talk a little bit about immigration, what's been going on here in our state, and how you all can support and also plug in and share resources with other folks who may be interested in this topic. I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation. Okay. And feel free to, if there are things that are unclear, feel free to let me know and I'm happy to clarify. Or if there's more information that you would like, please flag me down. Hopefully this is, a conversation about a pretty heavy topic, especially in this moment. But one that I think is very, very important for us to have. And I really appreciate the reading today because it felt very timely, even though it was written a long time ago. Well, I'll talk a little bit about Innovation Law Lab first. Innovation Law Lab, as was mentioned, is an organization of lawyers, coders, and advocates. And really, our mission is to leverage advocacy, technology, and law to fight for immigrant and refugee justice. And this is not often a kind of trio of things that are together in an organization, but our work really started as a result to immigrant detention and what we were seeing happening in the US. And we really felt like there was not enough resources. So how could we leverage the resources that we did have, use technology to help us expand those resources? And how can we use the power of advocacy and the power of organizing to help people understand what was happening in our communities? And how can we leverage the law, which gives us a lot of rights, to be able to help our immigrant community? So that's really how kind of our organization started. But we started in 2014 in Artesia, New Mexico. And what we were trying to address was family detention. There was a detention facility in New Mexico that was housing kids and family members in cages, right? There was a big narrative around kids in cages and what was happening. And so our founder, Stephen Manning, and several of his friends who were lawyers got together, went down to Artesia, and really said, how can we leverage limited legal resources? So there wasn't a ton of lawyers, but there was a lot of people detained. How can we use our limited resources and, one, shed light on what is happening, and two, help provide free immigration legal services to everyone in the detention facility? So that's really how it started. And since then, we've been building coalitions, and the organization is really based here in Oregon, but we have lawyers and colleagues all across the US. And so it started with that mission about, making sure that people have representation when they need it the most, and ending the cruel world that we were living in that not a lot of people knew about, and shedding light on what was happening in that. So since then, Innovation Law Lab has led several different campaigns, many here locally, and also some in other spaces. A more notable one that you all may remember is there were several people detained in Norcor, or there was another kind of larger detention in Sheridan, where people were being held for immigration detention here in our state, where in fact we do not, as a state, allow for immigrant detention in our facilities due to our state laws. And so what they were doing was saying that they were on hold for a federal crime, and it was really immigrant detention, and they were not allowing people to see attorneys. And so our attorneys actually sued to be able to represent everyone. And luckily, from the Sheridan Project, there were 122 individuals detained in Sheridan, and luckily, every one of them was released, and every one of them won their asylum case. And so, yeah, it was really beautiful. And it just goes to show what can be done when people organize together, when we highlight the cruelty of what is happening, and when we provide people the resources that they need to be able to win their cases. Innovation Law Lab has also been a part of many kind of legislative wins. Some of the most notable ones are the what we call the expansion of the Sanctuary Promise Act that happened in 2021, where we, added more safeguards, including a statewide hotline for Sanctuary Promise, and people can now call the Sanctuary Promise hotline when they perceive that there is a violation, and the Department of Justice is required to investigate those violations. We also supported the creation of an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Advancement at the state. That office lives in the Department of Human Services and is really tasked to make sure that our state agencies are finding ways to make sure that our immigrant community is not excluded from any kind of safety net programs that are provided. And I think we are probably most proud of our fight for universal representation. So for folks who may not know, immigration it's actually not a crime or a criminal offense. It's considered a civil offense. And what that means is that you are not afforded an attorney like you would be if you committed a crime. So in the Constitution, it says you're allowed to have an attorney, you have the right to an attorney. And so everyone has the right to an attorney, but if you commit a crime, the government is supposed to provide an attorney for you if you do not have one. If it is a civil offense, like is immigration, the government does not provide an attorney for you. And so in 2022, we advocated for $15 million to create a program here in the state of Oregon to provide free immigration legal services to folks who need them. And so that is our statewide universal representation program. Luckily, we were able to pass that. And that is what most people now know as ECHO, or the Equity Court of Oregon program. And that, people can call the number. They get navigated into the program. They get assigned to a community navigator who helps them kind of understand how things work. And then they meet with an attorney, and an attorney represents them at all of the levels of their immigration case. Immigration law is quite complicated. They say it's almost as complicated as tax law, and that, those are the two most complicated laws. And so when you're asking people who are new to this country, who maybe don't speak the same language, who don't, understand all of the laws to represent themselves in front of a judge fighting against a really skilled attorney, most people do not win their cases when they don't know the rules. And so universal representation aims to help people understand, what the process is, but also provide them free immigration legal services. So we've been lucky enough to have this program for a few years now. And I think if we did not have this program, we would have seen many more detentions and many more deportations over the last year with the increased surges from the administration. We also have several projects, like a project in New Mexico aiming to shed light on the detention and healthcare abuses of folks detained in Torrance County. And we've been behind a lot of the things that were passed in the immigrant justice package that just this last legislative session. And our lawsuits actually shed light to a lot of the operations that were happening here locally and how they were targeting our immigrant community. And we have been able to share a lot of information about just how the government has surveilled our communities and has been surveilling all of us to create what they call target-rich locations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but this is just a little bit of context about kind of where we as Innovation Law Lab sit and kind of what our values are and how we practice in the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about two coalitions because it feels important to share. One is Oregon for All, and the other is Oregon Worker Relief. Innovation Law Lab, as I mentioned, we are strong in our belief that advocacy is important, and we also believe that we cannot do this work alone, right? There's not enough lawyers to help everybody, and there's not enough individuals to be able to take one case at a time. And so we do a lot of our work in coalitions and relationship building are really important to us. And so we are a part of the Oregon for All coalition. I'm actually one of the tri-chairs. And in the Oregon for All coalition, that was actually started in February of 2025. And it was a direct response to this new administration and how they were targeting our immigrant community. And so this coalition works to advance immigrant and refugee justice to build a more welcoming and prosperous state through education, research, organizing, and policy advocacy. And together we uplift our shared values to foster thriving and resilient communities. So our big three pillars of kind of what Oregon for All does is we do cross-organizational coordination, meaning that, if there are organizations that are seeing activities happen in Hillsborough, we want the organizations in Bend to know what those are so that if enforcement changes, that they are ready and have provided people the information that they need to be able to safeguard and protect themselves. And then the other piece that we do is communication and narrative change. There has been so much in the media criminalizing our immigrant community, and people don't really understand who our immigrant community is. And oftentimes, an immigrant is your neighbor, is the parent of one of your daughter's teammates, right? There are people in our community, and no one is out saying, I'm undocumented, or I don't have papers. That's not how society works. And so there's been this intentional almost narrative that has been created that immigrants are criminals. And in all reality, the immigrant community has been living here for many, many years. The US is a nation of immigrants. And so it has really, I think, caused a lot of harm, these narratives. And so our work is really to counter those narratives and helping people understand, who immigrants really are. And then the last pillar is really rapid response, and what Oregon for All is kind of most known for. So we have a team of 19 different regional leads, and those regional leads are all across the state, and they are kind of coordinating any rapid response. So if a detention does happen, oftentimes there are cars left behind with shattered windows. There are kids left at school with no parents. And so our rapid response teams are really there to show up and try to help the family as best they can, and try to kind of coordinate with the rest of us how we can support the families and the individuals that get left behind. So that's Oregon for All. And these organizations are on the steering committee of Oregon for All. Many of these organizations have been around for a long time, but we really felt it was important to start kind of this coordination as we started to see lots of attacks on our immigrant community. And then the second coalition I mentioned is Oregon Worker Relief. Oregon Worker Relief was a coalition that actually started in the pandemic. And it was really designed for and by immigrant Oregonians to keep our families together and strengthen our workforce and communities. As you may know, immigrant Oregonians and immigrants in general, when the pandemic happened, did not have access to things like the stimulus payments. They weren't getting they do not have access to unemployment insurance. And so when people lost their jobs, they were left with nothing. And so we stood up the Oregon Worker Relief Coalition really as a way to advocate for statewide investments to be able to provide one-time payments to families who had lost their job due to COVID and did not have the means to, we're not getting any of the stimulus payments or unemployment insurance, any of the social safety nets that we had. Our immigrant community was not receiving any of those. And so Oregon Worker Relief was stood up. And since then, Oregon Worker Relief has created a variety of different funds aimed at addressing lost work and wages, addressing climate disasters, the complex immigration system. Oregon Worker Relief actually houses the Equity Corps of Oregon program. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then we also have a home fund, which is geared at folks who, get eviction notices and do not have a means to be able to pay rent. We help provide 2 months worth of rent so that they, can get situated, as well as any interpretation needs people may have. So that's Oregon Worker Relief, and these are the different funds that Oregon Worker Relief has. The active ones or the newer ones are the ones with logos, and the ones kind of in gray are the ones that we have phased out, given that the pandemic is not as big of an issue anymore. Those were the things that we were providing kind of emergency assistance for. So now I'm gonna just kind of jump into Oregon's immigration context. First, I want to kind of start off by saying that over the last 30, 40 years, Oregon has actually leaned towards fairness. And what I mean by that is that we have, over several years, been working at making our state a more inclusive state. We were the first state in the nation to pass a state sanctuary law. We passed it in 1987 and then strengthened it in 2021 after we saw a challenge to our sanctuary law on the ballot in 2018, and Oregonians, resoundingly said, we want to keep this law. And so over the last several years, we have made changes to our laws to protect immigrant communities and to really make sure that they were included in the safety nets that we have. We've passed things like tuition equity, making it so undocumented students had access to higher education. We've passed things like Cover All People, which ensures that anybody who is income eligible to something like the Oregon Health Plan or Medicaid can get a state-funded kind of version of that. As I mentioned, we've passed a universal representation law. We've invested in things like farm worker overtime, making sure that our agricultural community can also have the benefits that everyone else shares around overtime pay. And then in 2026 passed a pretty comprehensive package of immigrant justice legislation to help our immigrant community. And so setting the context that I think as Oregonians, we're actually proud of supporting our immigrant community and have been working over the last several years to make sure that our immigrant community is included. That's kind of the backdrop. And so what we have seen from the federal government is actually many harmful executive orders and violent attacks on our community. From day one, we saw an attempt to redefine and end birthright citizenship. We saw many and have been seeing many of the legal pathways to, get lawful status. Those either go away or now being delayed or taking a long time. And so the ending of most kind of the right way, which, there's a whole narrative there, but all of those pathways are being shut out. And then we are seeing an increased enforcement in our communities, as well as threats of withholding federal funding to any states that are not sharing information about their immigrant populations, or are not collaborating with immigration enforcement and do not allow their local law enforcement to collaborate. We've also seen many memos from this administration where they have said that they want to see enforcement actions in what used to be considered sensitive locations. These are spaces like schools, churches, community centers, hospitals. And so we have seen those places be now targets of immigration enforcement where, for the past 30 years, those places were not places of immigration enforcement. And we saw massive investments into Immigration and Customs Enforcement and DHS, all of which have caused, I think, more presence of immigration enforcement across the country, but certainly have seen an increase presence here locally, and have also seen, the threats of sending in the National Guard to states who are supportive of their immigrant community. And these are just a few of the things that we have seen. Obviously, there have been many others, but this is kind of the types of attacks that our immigrant community has been facing over the last year and some time. And so how have we as a state felt that impact? We have seen prior to this administration, and I think you can maybe see like 23, 24, we saw, detentions have always been happening. I don't think there is an immigrant who is unaware that like immigration enforcement has existed, detentions do happen, but just the level of immigration enforcement that we have seen over the last year has been pretty astonishing. I think we went from the Biden era, seeing maybe 1 to 2 detentions every month or a quarter, to seeing 2 to 50 detentions a day over the last year, with 50 being one of the most days that we saw detention. And how that has felt on the legal services side is we have seen a 4,000% increase in people trying to access our services. And so while there's already not enough attorneys, just the need for immigration legal services has really skyrocketed in the state over the last year. We've also seen a increased fear of people going to work, going to schools, going to hospitals. We've seen cancellation of many cultural events where people don't feel like they can go to those cultural events. And so communities are making really tough decisions about, hosting those events. We've also seen an increased violence at or near ICE facilities. We know there's an ICE facility here in Portland, and so have certainly seen just more happening there. We've seen a lot of denied access to counsel. And so, as I mentioned, immigration is considered a civil offense, so the government does not provide you one. But if you have one, we have seen this administration actually deny your attorney to be able to talk to you, which is just pretty horrific. We've also seen over the last couple of months arrests at courthouses while people are trying to pay, parking tickets or what other things that may happen. We've seen some arrests there, as well as last summer, we saw just arrests at immigration court, which felt really troubling because part of any asylum process, you have to go to court to be able to claim that you are seeking asylum and that you want to be here lawfully. And many of those people have entered lawfully into the country. And so we saw the like ICE attorneys dismiss the cases and then immigration enforcement be outside trying to detain them right after. And so that is, really a really harmful practice because you want people to, go to court and do things in this lawful pathway. But if you're arresting them at court, there's, little incentives for people to actually do that. We also saw masked agents do what they called live targeting here in Oregon, where they have been conducting mass surveillance. And they actually had an operation where they sent over 100 agents from across the US to conduct Operation Black Rose. And that was really an operation to target more and more Oregonians here locally. And how they did that was through the surveillance. They have different apps on their phones, and these apps have been taking a lot of our data and our information. And these apps have told them these locations, so it's not targeting an individual who has committed a crime or who has done anything. It's these locations have highly populated immigrant communities or Latino communities, and those are the places that they were going. So we saw a lot of increased enforcements in places like Hillsborough, places like Forest Grove, Woodburn, Salem. A lot of those places were actually Gresham. Those were the places that were seeing, I think, the most enforcement during Operation Black Rose. And it was due to this surveillance and targeting that they were doing. And I'll just kind of highlight that even in the Oregon v. Trump litigation, they had said that they had a goal of 30 arrests a day, and that there were many days where the office either met or exceeded that goal. And so what they shared with that is really that there wasn't that they were going after individuals, they were just going to meet this quota. And we've heard nationally that that was something that they were trying to do in many different states, is have a quota of people that they needed to detain. And we did see here locally many US citizens get detained, legal permanent residents get swept up in that because they were making assumptions based on people and what they look like. I'll share a little bit more about how we've been fighting back. As I mentioned, we are a state that believes in fairness. And so there's been several different cases that maybe you have seen or been following that we have been using to fight back. Many of these cases are actually cases that Innovation Law Lab has brought forward to the court. So the Peña v. Nome case is really around sensitive locations. And Peña, I don't know if you all know them, but they are Oregon's farm worker union. And we worked with them to sue on their behalf for sensitive locations and ensuring that places like hospitals, schools, healthcare facilities, community centers, that those remain protected. And so that litigation is still ongoing. But we have sued to try to restore some of those sensitive location protections. The Clear Clinic v. Nome case is about access to counsel. We know it is a constitutionally protected right, but we had many attorneys try to see their clients at the Portland ICE facility, at the Eugene ICE facility, and be denied access. And so we sued on behalf of Clear Clinic, trying to prove that we have been denied access into those facilities when we had all the information about the clients and have tried to speak to folks. That litigation is still ongoing. But we hope to get a answer pretty soon on that case. MJMA v. Wamsley, that was our warrantless arrests and surveillance case. I'm not sure if you all followed, but now the state of Oregon has a preliminary injunction saying that they cannot do these warrantless arrests because of this case. So what they were doing was during Operation Black Rose, they did not have warrants to target people, and they were going to communities, pulling people over at gas stations on their way to work, and just detaining individuals. And so the law, what immigration law says, is that they have to have a individualized assessment and have to have a warrant to arrest an individual. And so what this case actually showed us is that they were using their applications to surveil communities, and they were then creating false paperwork so that they would detain individuals and then after the fact create these administrative warrants that are not real judicial warrants. They were just paperwork that they created. And so this case has actually we were able to get the preliminary injunction, meaning that they cannot do warrantless arrests here in the state of Oregon. And the litigation is ongoing as we get more and more information about the tactics that they were using to target our communities. Ortega Gonzalez v. Nome was a lawsuit for student visas. Over the summer last year, there was an effort to take away student visas for international students who were studying in the US, and we sued on behalf of two individuals who, were going to get their degrees, were in a master's program and doctoral program, and then their visas were suddenly revoked with no explanation. And so we sued on their behalf, and both of the individuals are still doing their studies now. But there was a time in the summer where it was unclear if they would be sent back to their home country or if they would be able to finish their studies. OJM v. Bostock was the case where individuals who were going to their immigration hearings were being detained at immigration court. OJM was really one of the first. She was actually the first individual who was detained at a courthouse here in Oregon. And after that, I think there were 6 different detentions that happened after her detention. But actually every single individual that was detained at an immigration courthouse has now been released because we sued on behalf of every single one of them. So this was the case that kind of kicked off that multiple lawsuits. But since then, we have not seen people be detained out as they're leaving immigration court. What we have been seeing now more is as they're leaving kind of regular court, but not immigration court because of this lawsuit and the advocacy of many other organizations. The last two, Dickinson v. Trump, that one is a lawsuit that the ACLU filed. It's really around crowd control munitions at the ICE facility. The federal government was deploying lots of harmful chemicals and munitions as people were protesting, one of which, they were doing when, everything was peaceful. And so that case is really about trying to limit their ability to use crowd control munitions. And then Oregon v. Trump, that is a case that was brought by the Attorney General around the National Guard deployment. And so these are just a few of the different cases that have been brought against this administration for their targeting of our immigrant community. And I think we've been pretty successful in many of these cases. And then some of them are still obviously ongoing. But it just goes to show that even the law is on our side. When what we have been seeing has really been unlawful behavior by this administration. So, I shared a lot of kind of sad, harmful things. I'm sharing kind of how we've been fighting back. And I did want to just share kind of a more zoomed in version of, what we have done over the last year as Oregon to protect our immigrant community. So in 2026, the legislative session, it just ended in March. We actually did an amazing job at finding ways to protect our immigrant community. And so there were groups of organizations that came together, and we created an immigrant justice package. And we said, to the state legislature, these are the things that we feel like we need right now to help continue to protect our immigrant communities and to kind of stay afloat as a state. And so we felt like it was important to have critical investments and budget neutral protections to help us kind of pave the way and move forward. And so the critical investments were investments in programs like universal representation, which is that free immigration legal services program I mentioned, maintaining the Healthier Oregon program, meaning maintaining people's access to healthcare. We wanted to see a school meals for all. I think right now, as people are, growing in their fear, they are not going to the grocery store. And so we wanted to make sure that just at least all schools had free meals. And so that was kind of one of the bills that we were proposing. We wanted some food assistance for refugees and immigrants who had access to SNAP, but due to HR 1 had lost that access. And then we wanted to make sure that we were protecting SNAP. Food and housing have been some of the most impactful things that have happened as kind of a result to a detention and a deportation. People have lost their, ability to have stable food and housing. And so those were the things that we were kind of trying to protect. And then the budget neutral protections, the safeguarding families and students was really about schools notifying families if ICE activity was happening on or near campus. We actually saw several schools see ICE officers kind of roaming the parking lots, waiting at bus stops. And so we wanted schools to actually notify families when this is happening so families can make informed decisions for themselves, not so that they can, go or not go, but that every individual should have the ability to decide how they assess that situation. We had a bill about stopping data brokers from sharing our information. As I mentioned, through our litigation, we found that they were surveilling us through our data. And so we aim to stop data brokers from sharing our information. And so now any public agency, we were able to pass this bill, and now any public agency who has contracts with a data broker must first get an attestation from them saying that they are not going to be sharing that information with immigration enforcement, because we believe our data and our information is ours. And if we want to share it with the federal government, we can, but that is not up to a data broker to decide. That is up to us as Oregonians to decide. We also had a Protect Your Door Act, meaning that if a federal agency or local agency, came to your door, did not have a warrant, that we could actually sue the individuals who were conducting that arrest because they did not have a warrant. We introduced a public contracts prohibition policy. Unfortunately, that one did not pass, but it was around making sure that any state dollars and any public contracts that we had were not then later used for immigration enforcement. We passed several different anti-discrimination protections, including that employers cannot fire individuals if they end up needing to change their immigration paperwork. So let's say I am a DACA recipient and I need to update my status or paperwork because I'm now a permanent resident, that there was no retaliation for updating paperwork. And then the Law Enforcement Accountability and Visibility Act was really around making sure that we know who is detaining or arresting individuals. We saw a lot of masked individuals. We didn't know what agency they were with. We didn't know if they were with an agency at all. And so this is really requesting all law enforcement agencies, including our local and our state, as well as the federal, to essentially, identify themselves whenever they are conducting their work. And then we had a healthcare without fear policy, which said that, your immigration status is considered, private information. And so the healthcare facilities cannot share that. And also employees cannot be retaliated against if they share know your rights information with an individual. Yeah.
One was not done, which is the
The public contracts, yeah.
Everything else was,
Everything else on the budget is here, so so we were able to accomplish almost everything on the budget neutral options with the exception of the public contracts bill. And then in the critical investments, we were able to get critical investments for universal representation. We were able to keep the Healthier Oregon program with the emergency assistance, and we were able to protect SNAP. So we had many great victories, and I think this was due to the people seeing what was happening in our communities and people understanding that what was happening was pretty unlawful. And so, together as a community, we were able to, secure many of these things. So all of these were passed, and then the rest is kind of the investments that we saw just this last legislative session. And as I mentioned, a lot of our work is done in coalition, but we could also have not done that work without our legislative champions. These were legislators who very early on reached out to us as organizations and said, what do we need to do to protect our community, and what are laws that we can pass as a state to help the communities that are being under attack right now. And so these are the legislators that led a bill. There were definitely more supporters, and none of the bills would have passed if we didn't have more supporters, but these were really the champions who kind of led the way on a lot of those policies. And as I mentioned, we had a broad coalition of unions, community-based organizations, and advocacy groups really trying to fight for this package, and were successful because of the large mobilization of folks. We also had really coordinated communications and messaging, and we wanted people to really understand why it was urgent. And so a lot of it was making sure that everybody understood what we were trying to do, and how the reason why we built a package was that we did not want these things to be pitted against each other. We did not want to choose between the healthcare policy and the food policy, right? You need both healthcare and food. And so we packaged these things together to make sure that people understood that we needed all of them to be able to thrive as a community. And this kind of wraps up a little bit of my presentation. I will just share some of the key resources and then kind of ways that you all can get involved. I think one of the biggest resources we have as a state is the Equity Corps of Oregon program, or the Universal Representation Program, that provides free immigration legal services. So if you or anybody you know needs access to an attorney, they can call the number. We have the Equity Corps of Oregon has a call center that's open Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. But also if there is a detention that happens, the PERC hotline actually refers individuals directly into the ECHO program as well. And so people can utilize this resource, or even if they have questions and want to talk to an immigration attorney, they can enroll in the program and we can get them connected. Other resources that are available, there's a lot of Know Your Rights information about, what you can do, what your rights are. As I mentioned, the Equity Corps of Oregon program, Oregon Work Relief also has resources available. And Innovation Law Lab built over the last year several different toolkits around safeguarding organizations, healthcare facilities, places of worship, how you and those spaces can really prepare if immigration enforcement shows up. How to ask for a warrant. What does a warrant actually look like? Making sure that you have, complied with all tax laws, and how to do that. We've created several different toolkits that are available on our website. The Attorney General has also created a sanctuary toolkit for folks who want to understand our sanctuary law better. And then Oregon for All has created a lot of messaging and media support for people who want to know how to talk about immigration, how to talk about our immigrant community. There's a lot of resources available on the Oregon for All website as well. And then the PERC number is kind of if you see ICE or if you see a detention happening, you can call and report that to the PERC hotline. And then the Equity Corps of Oregon, or the ECHO Legal Services number, is also on the screen. You may not be able to see it, but we have information on Innovation Law Lab, on the legal services, and Oregon for All on that little table over there, as well as ECHO cards for you all to take and share kind of the information. I think the biggest thing people can do, I think a lot of this feels very overwhelming and sometimes feels like we don't know what to do or how to help. But I think the biggest thing is, if you see something, report it. We have a little handout that says how to properly film ICE. ICE says that to individuals that they cannot be filming an activity. That is incorrect. You are lawfully allowed to record law enforcement and what they are doing. And, if they ask you to step back, you do have to step back, but you can continue to record even if they say that that is not something you can do. And so we have information about how to do that. There are also many different kind of all of the organizations that have been working in helping our immigrant community. You can, many of them have volunteer options. You can help, do data entry or whatever it may be, financial contributions, whatever it may be. I think there's always ways to plug in. You can call your legislators, let them know that this is an issue that you care about. And there are many, many ways to help protect our communities and get involved. So, and then lastly, I'll just make a quick plug. Innovation Law Lab was actually followed by Bloomberg Originals over the last year. And we just had a short documentary be released about our work. It was released the last week of May. We're going to have a community screening in July, and I'm happy to share the information once I have all of it. But if you did want to watch it, it is on YouTube. It's a 26-minute video just about how we have been responding and what we have been seeing over the last year. And I think I may be close to time, but also thank you all so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, while they're collecting numbers here, we've got one on chat already. Kurt Mackey asks, is any work being done to keep authorities from shuffling clients to different detention centers?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So that is a really big problem that we have been seeing. That is a tactic, unfortunately, that they are using to move people around. And that tactic, what it does is actually aim to prevent people from getting access to their attorneys, having access to their families, and really losing hope in that winning their case. And so that is a tactic to, I think, bring that individual down from believing that there is a way out. There are many national organizations that are trying to figure out how to do that, do something about it. But unfortunately, I think because those are, once somebody is in detention, those are kind of like decisions that they make. It has been a little bit hard to address some of those things, but certainly it is something that we're, collectively trying to figure out how to stop. But the deportation machine has just gotten so big that, they have been able to do a lot of these transfers in a really cruel way. And then we know that they are also trying to build detention warehouses. And those things we have certainly been trying to stop or at least slow down by trying to, sue about that or making sure that there are adequate conditions. We know that, warehouses are not places for people to be housed. And so making sure that, we are pushing back at every step of the way in the building process, as well as the housing process, access to healthcare, right? Like those are the places where we have been successful in slowing that down. But it is quite difficult when they have billions of dollars and we are doing the work, with limited resources that states are providing or that individuals like ourselves are providing.
Okay, question number 1.
I'm curious, you mentioned the filming of ICE, interacting with ICE.
Yeah.
They have murdered people. Would you just give us some advice if we are, I was down, several of us were down at a peaceful protest and were tear gassed. How do we safely interact? Your recommendation, safely interact.
Totally. I think our biggest recommendation is every individual should assess their own risk, right? Because your risk is likely different than my risk based on many factors, right? Like the way I look, the way you look, age, whatever it may be. And so every individual should make informed decisions based on, their own comfortability. And we are not in any way asking people to interfere with immigration enforcement. We are just asking people to document because it is a lawful right for us to document what is happening. And in order for us, we understand that people have been killed. And I think that was, I think, a rude awakening for all of us, them included, right? How far are they willing to go? As well as, what are the things that we may see if we are documenting what they are doing, which I think goes to that, this is what happens in a fascist regime is that, and so I think every individual should really assess their own risk. And the thing we are, we try not to give any like legal advice because then people will say, well, you told me to do this thing and I did it and now, something happened. So it's not like, I am not a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving any of you legal advice. But people should assess their own risk and do what they are comfortable with. And if you are not comfortable filming ICE or immigration enforcement, then you don't have to, right? But I think what has been important and, a lot of those videos have actually been used as proof in a lot of our litigation about what is happening. And that is how we have won a lot of our work is that we have evidence of them lying. We have evidence of them, falsifying paperwork. We have evidence of all of that. And all of that has been what has helped our litigation. And so it is really a tough balance, but, being able to see and televise what we are seeing on the ground is, I think, some of the most important things. So, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Question 2.
You mentioned arrest quotas in connection with ICE, but also I'm familiar that it's been a bad situation in New York City for a long time, that the New York police were doing the arrest quotas illegally, but no court would take jurisdiction. That there could be many other local law enforcement people, and even in Oregon, who are subject to quotas on their work and have to arrest people, and that might fall pretty heavily on the groups that you're trying to protect. Can you tell us anything more about that? Like, has New York still got them since they've got a new mayor? Do you know of arrest quotas operating in Oregon at the local level?
So I don't, there's so much news that I don't track all the news. So I don't have information about New York and their kind of arrest quotas. I will say that I think, quotas have been things that, as you mentioned, we have seen in the past. And I think we were very concerned when we started seeing these immigration arrest quotas, because that meant that they were not looking for individuals, as they claim to be. They were actually going into communities. And like I mentioned, there were US citizens that were detained here in Oregon, permanent residents that were detained, people with lawful status, who ended up in the detention and deportation pipeline. And so that's, I think, where quotas are really harmful, is that they are not actually looking for an individual who had done something. They're looking just to meet numbers. And so I'm unaware of like local law enforcement having arrest quotas, especially like around immigration. I do know that other states, if they have agreements with immigration enforcement, that if they like pull someone over and they have agreements to send somebody over, or to hold somebody in their jail longer for federal immigration enforcement, that's when there is a lot of collaboration between local and state enforcement. I think like states like Florida or Texas, like if you get pulled over by the police for speeding, you could be, taken in and turned over to immigration enforcement. Luckily, our state sanctuary law says that our local law enforcement cannot collaborate with ICE in that way. And so I think we have laws that protect us from that, but there are other states that are not protected in that way. And so arrest quotas, I think, are really harmful because they're not about preventing any crime or anything of that nature. They're actually about numbers, and the detention space and detention in general has become a like enterprise that has actually been helping these corporations, these large corporations who own, the majority of the detention facilities, and they are making money off of every individual that gets detained and is put in their detention facilities. And so this just kind of goes back to a lot of the kind of harmful ways that all communities get hurt, is that these corporations are making money off of our criminalization.
Question number 3.
As you said, that the immigration law is the most complicated in this country. So I would like to ask, can we hope that immigration system be reformed to balance national security with humanitarian needs? Because we always hear from president that we are just sending from a country criminals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a real question that we as a nation really have to grapple with is, how do we, where do we go from here, right? I think, hopefully, we will see a slowdown in this, or that we will be able to stop a lot of it through litigation. But I think, the important questions are exactly those, right? Where do we go from here? How do we create lawful pathways? How do we address what is happening, and figure that out? I know that there are, national conversations that community-based organizations are having about, if there is an opportunity for immigration reform, what could it look like? I do know that there are several bills that have been introduced in Congress around, creating more pathways for legalization, but it's hard, it's complicated, and especially I think in a time where the government has zero interest to fix our immigration laws, but rather has an interest to detain and deport people. It's hard to see any of that move forward, but I think we are hopeful that if there is a change, that we are able to move something quickly so that we can create a balance and navigate that situation. Mhm.
Question number 4.
I was wondering, at the very beginning, you put some dates out there, and you had, where Oregon, passed a law saying no detention centers in Oregon. And then that was in 2018, and then in 2020 something, you said, there's there was a detention center in Oregon. So do we have a bill that says no detention centers in Oregon? And are we not supporting that bill? Are we just ignoring it?
So I'll clarify a little bit. In 1987, we passed the first state sanctuary law, which said that no individual can be targeted because of their race or their ethnicity. And so it didn't have the detentions pieces. There have been rules, regulatory rules, that have said that there shouldn't be detention facilities, private detention facilities in our state. And so the sanctuary law was more about making sure that people are not unjustly racially profiled. And then in 2021, we were able to strengthen that. And that now says that our local law enforcement cannot collaborate with ICE to do that work. It has some prohibitions around courthouse arrests. And then it has kind of the detention facility pieces in there. And so I think the initial law was, I think we were the first in the country to even try to address this type of thing. And then in 2018, that law was actually challenged. People wanted to get rid of it. And voters overwhelmingly said, no, we want to keep it. And then in 2021, we said, we're actually going to strengthen it. And so that's kind of how it has happened. I will say, there have been over the last couple of months, arrests that have felt like it's oddly suspicious that detention happened right after that person was released from jail, or it's oddly suspicious that this local law enforcement officer is near this ICE officer. And so there are, I think, suspicions that sanctuary law violations are happening. And when those things exist, we're asking everybody to call the Sanctuary Promise Hotline, report it, record it, document it. Because if those things are happening, then we want to be able to either sue about it or try to address it in another way. And so, when there have been possible collaborations between our local and state law enforcement and immigration enforcement, those are the things that should be reported to the Sanctuary Promise Hotline so that they can investigate and that individuals can do something about it. I will say, I think there was a lawsuit a few years ago from the Rural Organizing Project against the Cottage Grove Police Department, who was using their kind of local jail to hold people for ICE. And so we sued about it. They sued about it, and now they have changed their contract, their U.S. Marshal contract. And so I think the documentation of those instances became really important, making sure that people knew. And of course, I think the other piece of that is, we can pass all the laws that we want, but if no one is implementing them, or if nobody is, forcing that implementation, then laws are just laws, right? In the same way that the federal government right now is not abiding by our laws, it really depends on all of us to document the abuses, to make sure that we are holding the agencies accountable, and that we are, reporting when these laws are being violated.
We have another question from Zoom. I'll get the name wrong, Chai Cargbo. If possible, can you speak more about your work with the Oregon legislature? What does the process look like and how often do you guys get involved?
Yeah, so it varies, right? I think every kind of organization has a different process. But Innovation Law Lab, we do go and talk to legislators about the issues that our immigrant community is facing. We do have we're registered to lobby legislators on this issue. And so we do bring people to share their story, to talk about what is happening in the community. And we also help legislators who want to create laws that, don't interfere with federal laws because of, supremacy clause and other things. We do help kind of them understand that. So we do, go and advocate as every citizen should, and every individual should be advocating for the things that they want to see changed. I think our organization does that. But there are regulations around like what nonprofits can do. And so we follow the regulations that are around that. And so we do not endorse any candidates. You won't see me talking about this is the best candidate. I'm just going to share, who's been supportive of our issues and that type of stuff.
Great. And question 5.
Yeah, I really appreciate the work that Innovation Law Lab does. And I just wonder how you get the funds, because it seems like a lot of services you're providing.
Yeah, so we, like I think most nonprofits, fundraise, we get individual donations. We have a few grants from private philanthropy, who are kind of investing in this work and want to make sure that everyone has access to services. And then we also receive funding for the legal services that we provide through the Universal Representation Program. So the lawyers do the work and kind of they get paid for that. And then the rest of us is kind of private philanthropy and individual donations. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are there any last questions?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about cooperation between the federal government and local law enforcement. The regime is trying to spread terror and fear, and they've been sending surplus military weapons or toys to local police departments. And the people in the police departments who think they're warriors really like to get that stuff. Is there anything we can do at the state level to keep that from happening?
That I think is a question for the legislature. I wouldn't know how to answer it. I'm sure there are probably ways that we can regulate that. But I wouldn't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Helen?
Yeah.
When did immigrants, undocumented people here in the state have access to healthcare? That's relatively new, isn't it?
Yeah, that it's in the presentation.
Yes,
So,
I know.
here.
But
So we passed,
Yeah.
It was actually incremental. So we passed Cover All Kids, which said any child 0 to, I think, 26 can get access to healthcare in 2017. And it's, anybody who's eligible to things like the Oregon Health Plan, right? And so that passed in 2017, and then Cover All People passed in 2020. Yeah, so it is fairly new. And I think people are, starting to access it more and more because, they didn't have access to healthcare before. A lot of our immigrant community relied on, clinics and paying out of pocket or the emergency room. And they wouldn't go to the doctor for any preventative services. And so emergency room visits cost a lot of money, much more than preventative care. And so that was part of the advocacy is we could actually be saving resources if we actually help provide healthcare. And so that did happen in 2020. And I think, we're lucky that it happened then, because I think we could not have seen a pandemic, and people would not have survived in the way that they did if they didn't have access to healthcare.
Too, where, and I'm so pleased with these things.
Yeah.
When people are denied a driver's license, they can't get insurance. When people are denied, and so they're uninsured drivers go up. If people are denied healthcare, then they get sicker and sicker and sicker. And so it is just, you're so right to do these things. And thank you for.
Yeah. I mean, I think when we think about, how a society should work, and we should all have access to these things. And I think we were not fighting specifically for just immigrants to have these things. We're fighting for all of us to have access to these things. And I think the biggest thing that we're fighting for now is, if we are creating additional programs or benefits for all Oregonians, how do we make sure that in our thinking, we are not excluding the immigrant community? How do we not create these requirements that are, well, you have to show proof of citizenship, or you have, right? Like, those are requirements that then exclude communities. And I think we are all about making sure that everyone is welcome, regardless of who you are, making sure that, everyone has the ability to live with dignity and be able to thrive in this country. And these all seem like values that you all share. And so I think we're all fighting for the same thing. Yeah.
So thank you for the wonderful work you do and
Thank
for
you.
this wonderful presentation. Let's
Thank
give
you.
her a hand.